What's up, everybody? Welcome back in. We have another video today reacting to some stuff on the Ruby Franke Jodi Hildebrand case, but specifically through the eyes of Ben Chu, which is a lawyer that you know on this channel we really like. We really enjoyed watching him in court in the Johnny Depp case. He represented Johnny Depp. He was the lead attorney in that case. And we've broken down a lot of what he's done in court and a lot of his reactions to other things. He says, multiple times, multiple interviews, I don't think he's ever done criminal defense. He is a civil kind of big firm lawyer now. I'm not sure if he did any of it early in his career, but some of the stuff he says during this interview, I do disagree with. And I've disagreed with him before. We've broken down his reaction to other cases, and even I believe this case in the beginning. And there are some things I have some major disagreements with him. So we're going to dive into those today. There are certain things I think the way he views how this case has developed over time and how the defendants have developed over time and how their stories have changed. And I think his view is probably a lot more in line with what a big chunk of the audience watching this right now feels about whether or not it's genuine or not, whether or not she's just trying to play people or manipulate people as Ruby Franke, which obviously I agree could be true. I'm hoping that it's not, but it could be true. So he's got some very harsh words for her there that we'll listen to. A lot of the B-roll we've already seen from the other details we've watched 2 or 3 times on this channel. So I'm going to skip through some of that to really focus on what Ben Chu has to say about this situation and what parts I agree with and what parts I disagree with respectfully, because I do respect him. I think he's a good lawyer. I think he knows what he's talking about in a lot of different areas. I just do disagree with him with a few things that he says here. And there are some very big points that he makes. So we're going to do that today in today's video. Make sure you guys hit the like button, give some love to Ben Chu in the chat as always, because we do respect him and we appreciate his takes on these things. So we're going to listen to this interview on law and crime together now. Oh, make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe to our page, do all the things here before we start. And now we are going to get into it.
What was your reaction to seeing that?
Well, Jesse, I am the father of 2 boys, one who just celebrated his 12th birthday, and I became emotional watching that. Children that age are really vulnerable, as you know, and it was just pathetic and heart-wrenching to see.
Yeah. And, we know.
No disagreements there, obviously, that how horrible this was. He's got a 12-year-old boy. I have a 10-year-old daughter. The exact ages, basically, of the kids involved here. It's impossible to not feel anger, sadness, and all sorts of deep emotions when you see what happened to these kids.
What first responders encountered when they raced to that home. Let's take a look.
How did you get the ropes on you?
That if you
Kinds of victims explaining what happened.
I agree with you, Jesse, there's no defense of that. If you look at him, he's so emaciated, he's wasted away to nothing. And how anybody could torture a little boy like that, or a little girl, because the girl was also treated horrifically, it's beyond comprehension.
Let's move on. I want to get your reaction to this next part, which I thought was fascinating. When officers knocked on the door, the home of Jodi Hildebrand, she answered, apparently already on the phone with her attorney.
Police officers, open up! Got movement right here. Right there. Contact. Got movement. Open the door! Jodi? I need you to step out.
I have my turn.
That's great. Step out of the house.
No, I'm not gonna step out of
Step
the
out of the
house.
house. Step out of the house.
Whoa.
We're just gonna
Whoa,
step
whoa,
out.
whoa.
Is there anybody else home?
Wait a minute, how do you come in my house?
Right there.
They can walk into my house.
So have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant?
Have a seat right
Do
there.
you have a search
Have a
warrant?
seat right there. I'll explain everything after. Have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant, sir?
Control 12X11. Can you hold it there? We're searching the house.
I can tell you what's in the house.
Okay. Just have a seat right there for me.
Do you have a search warrant?
We'll explain it after this.
You can't just come into my house without a search warrant.
We'll explain everything after this, ma'am.
We will get more to that in a little bit, but your initial reaction to seeing her being taken out of that house so that they ultimately do find that 9-year-old girl in there.
Again, extraordinary. And as you noted, she had the presence of mind or consciousness of guilt to call her attorney.
So first disagreement right there with Ben Chu. And I think he may have said this in the last interview, and anybody that watched this interview that also watches my channel probably already knows what I'm going to say about this. To call your attorney when the cops show up at the door is not consciousness of guilt, right? It can be a couple things. Number one, it can be conscious of guilt. Sure. Number two, it can be you don't trust the cops, which a lot of people don't, and for different reasons in different areas. And we know that they had some of that here, whether it was founded in reality or not, doesn't really matter. That's a reason to call your lawyer. Or if you've been through literally anything legally before, criminally or civilly, You know, your lawyer is who can protect you. Your lawyer is who you trust if you know them, and you'd rather have your lawyer talk to the cops than you. That's the right decision. That's not the consciousness of guilt. And again, coming from somebody who, I've practiced a lot of criminal law, and I do just civil now, just plaintiff's work now, but I grew up my whole life, obviously, as my dad is a criminal defense lawyer. I practiced a lot of it earlier in my career. So that's like ingrained in me, and it's not in a lot of people. So I understand why people think that shows consciousness of guilt. But to prove and to just have the just black and white on right and wrong with this decision is you absolutely cannot use this against somebody in court or in a trial. You cannot say, well, look, she had her lawyer on the phone right when they showed up. It shows consciousness of guilt. There are certain things you can argue consciousness of guilt, like fleeing in the Crumbly case. This is not one of them. So to say that, I really disagree with. I wish people would not think that way, that if you call your lawyer, you must be guilty, especially because so many people say things that are used against them or twisted. We have fake confessions or coerced confessions that really would not happen if a lawyer was called and a lawyer was there. So I hate to see that. And I hate to have it called conscious of guilt for you calling your lawyer when the cops show up to search your house without a warrant. Now, did they do it appropriately with exigent circumstances like we talked about in another video? Absolutely. The cops didn't do anything wrong here. But is a person supposed to know that? You always hear, oh, they're supposed to have a search warrant, whatever. It's an exception to the search warrant. And mostly lawyers know that. So I don't think it shows consciousness of guilt. And I will always disagree with that, even though, again, I really respect Ben Chu and I do really like Ben Chu. And so none of this, and again, he obviously would disagree with me. He doesn't know me. He has no clue who I am. Doesn't care what I have to say probably, but this does not mean I don't like him or I think he's dumb or anything like that, just because we disagree on how things look, are, or could be argued legally.
And but to have the temerity to call the police, to call their conduct into question when she had a tortured girl inside her house is nothing short of extraordinary.
She may not think she did anything wrong, which we'll get into in a little bit, but let's focus on Ruby Franke. We will get to Jodi Hildebrand in a minute. So this is the mother of those two children, found to be basically starving. And from the time the police detained her at Jodi's home, she didn't say a word to officers. She was very silent. She was held in a small living room or living area with an officer monitoring her. And after more than an hour, a female investigator comes in to pat her down and put her in handcuffs. Let's take a look.
All right, well, it feels good in here. So, hey, Ruby asked this, and I know that said that you're already detained, but I'm going to be taking you back to the police department. Okay, so I'm going to have you pop up. If I can fit through here.
You want to put on one of our vehicles?
Yeah, you want to. Okay, just place your hand on your back for me. Perfect. And then, right now, I can put a finger in each of these, okay? And I'm just going to double up those so they don't tighten up on you on the way out there. Where's your car?
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit.
Just protocol.
A jail phone call that she did once they're at the station. Ben, you're a defense attorney. A lot of the time, that's the advice. Don't say anything until
Civil defense attorney is very different. Civil defense attorney is very different than criminal defense attorney.
you have a lawyer. She really took it to heart. Didn't even say like, no, I don't have.
And the clip basically was her just being stoic, saying, I don't want to say anything to my attorney. We broke this clip down at length together a couple videos ago. If you guys want to check that out, it's on the Ruby Franke 8-passenger playlist on our YouTube page.
Barbara just shook her head, very stoic. What'd you make of it?
Yeah, I was struck by the contrast you noted between her and Hildebrandt, that she was much more passive when you really would have thought the opposite. This is the mother of these 2 children, of the 6 children, and she acted, completely without any affect or emotion. You would have thought the opposite.
Would that have hurt her at trial? I mean, because on one hand, you could say, look, she didn't want to say anything. She's waiting for her attorney. But if that video like that played at her trial, would the jury look and say, she seems really cold, really defiant, almost annoyed at officers? And we'll get into it a little bit, but do you think that would hurt her?
I do, Jesse. I think that would have been very negative for her at trial. And that, as you suggested, that may have played into her ultimate decision to plead to the 4 counts.
Now, I would be absolutely shocked if that video was allowed at any trial to make her look bad, or for them to argue that she didn't care about him because she was exercising her right to remain silent, saying she wants to speak to her lawyer. It would be incredibly inappropriate for the state to use that to show either consciousness of guilt, or, as Ben Chu is about to say, she looks like a professional criminal because she knows to wait for her lawyer before she talks to cops. Absolutely not coming in at trial. They would have to find some other reason for that in order for it to come in at trial. There's no way that any judge or even any prosecutor, I think, would use the fact that Ruby Franke didn't answer their questions because she was waiting for her lawyer, and they continued to ask her questions, and she continued to say, I want a lawyer, or I'm not going to say anything, or just didn't answer them. That's just not something that can be used in a criminal case. You cannot use the criminal defendant's right to remain silent against them. It's something that the judge instructs the jury multiple times, even if they sit there in court and don't testify, and this is no different. I would be absolutely shocked if it could ever be used in the way that they're discussing right now.
What does the Ruby Franke story make clear? That it is so important to know who you're surrounding yourself with,
All right,
right?
this is an ad. We're going to jump through here real quick.
Are you, how many kids you have?
And again, her sitting there stoically, not answering.
I have a lawyer. Okay, more comfortable talking to him, I can step out. I'll wait till I have a lawyer. Okay.
They're just not going to use that against you. You have a right to a lawyer. That's the point of your rights. You have the right to remain silent and right to a lawyer. You're not going to use that against a criminal defendant for them exercising their rights. Regardless of what we think about her or anybody else, she's guilty. She deserves to be guilty. She deserves to go to prison for what she did. She did horrible things to her own children. And that is what they would prove at trial, not that she exercised her right to remain silent or exercised her right to have an attorney present.
So Ben, again, very stoic, only wants a lawyer. How do you think that would play? What is your reaction to it?
Again, I think it plays very poorly, very unnatural for a mother who is accused under suspicion of child abuse, for her not to defend herself or to make some kind of excuse to act like a professional.
To not defend herself or make some kind of excuse. It's like, what are you talking about? So she should, if you exercise your right to remain silent, that means you're guilty. That's just such a bad thought process and way to be talking to the public. Is like, that's just not how it works. I'm a little disappointed to hear this discussion that if you don't talk to cops, you're automatically guilty. I really hate that. I hate that description. I hope people don't believe that. And I hope people don't, just forget about their rights just because cops think you did something. In this case, sure, they were right, but there have been plenty of cases where they're wrong. And plenty of cases that anything somebody says, they're going to try to make them seem guilty based on what they said. And we already know when the prosecutors and the cops think you did it and they go and put it to a jury, they are 50 steps ahead of any defense team coming into a case.
Defend herself or to make some kind of excuse to act like a professional criminal and seek out a lawyer. I think it would play horribly to a jury.
To act like a professional criminal and seek out a lawyer. Gosh, I wish I could talk to Ben Chu because it would not, I think he would agree with me. I think when we discussed it, he would say, yeah, you're right. I mean, that probably wouldn't be held against her, but emotionally speaking, I have a 12-year-old son and it really makes me mad to watch this or something like that. I would think that's kind of how he's coming out towards it, but this just is not it, in my opinion. This is really not how it's supposed to sound from lawyers. It's just, I feel bad that he said this because I hope it doesn't change the way people think about people who exercise their rights. It's really hard to try and talk about our judicial system and get people to understand that. And sure, it sounds great to say, yeah, every bad person, just tell the cops what you did was wrong and everybody goes to prison. Great. If we didn't have any bad people or twisted cops or bad prosecutors or judges or people that were corrupt and innocent people going to prison or even losing their life over this stuff, fine. But we don't live in a society like that, which is why we give each citizen these rights to make sure things are done the appropriate way.
We know that when you request a lawyer, that can't be used against her, right? I mean, that wouldn't have necessarily been used against her. It's her right to have a lawyer, although maybe it could.
No, it couldn't.
I guess the question I have is
Really
when I look
couldn't.
at that, I remember during her sentencing, and we'll get to it in a little bit, where she talks about this distrust that she has of law enforcement. But, some people could look at that and say, maybe she was so manipulated by Jodi Hildebrand and this organization that no wonder she didn't say anything to law enforcement. I wonder from a defense perspective, of course she's going to act that way. She was manipulated into thinking law enforcement were the bad guys and that what she was doing was right. You think that's could have ever been a viable defense?
It could have been a defense. Whether it's viable really depends on the gullibility of the jury. But I think you're right. I think a defense lawyer in that position has to be creative and has to come up with an alternative theory to explain as much of the objective facts as you can. And that being brainwashed or so thoroughly manipulated by the other defendant is as good as a theory as she could have come up with.
Well, I will tell you, once Ruby Franke was locked up, she had these phone calls with her husband, Kevin. And at first, right after the arrest, she seems almost indignant that this happened. Take a look.
This is a witch hunt. The devil's been after me for years.
I'm gonna
Helped
just
her realize that she had been brainwashed. Let's play that.
All the kind of dump, but like that, and that's what
This
was
is like
on.
180 that was
Ben,
shown in the
certainly
jail calls
seems
that
like a
we
one.
again broke down together already. That's why I'm skipping through and we don't need to watch the whole thing again. We're just here for Ben Chu's reaction.
80 there. What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's definitely a 180. Whether it's convincing or not, I don't find it convincing at all. I mean, these are
He doesn't find it convincing. We talked about how, the timing may line up. I'm hoping that she did see the light. I'm hoping that she did snap out of it. And then again, what she said at sentencing even surprised the prosecutor. And don't forget the prosecutor. So we just broke down the prosecutor's comments in our last video. So go check that out because he knows a lot more than I know about the case and definitely more than Ben Chu knows about the case. Probably knows more about the case than me and Ben Chu put together. He lived it. He was in the, elbows deep in it. And he felt like there was some real change. So much so that they were willing to give her a better plea deal, especially how they're going to deal with the parole board. And to me, the prosecutor shaped my thinking of how this case went more than Ben Chu or anybody else, even myself or anybody else that's on the outside looking in, because he spoke more to the victims, the witnesses, and the defendants than anybody else. But Ben Chu is not buying it. And again, I think a lot of you are going to agree with that. And I understand it very well could be true. I'm hoping it's not. I hope there's real change. I'm hoping she did notice it. I'm hoping that she realizes the errors in her ways and she is going to continue to work on herself. Ben Chu is not buying it though.
her children, and she had the ultimate responsibility. She and her husband had the ultimate responsibility over their well-being. I understand that he left back in 2022, and I wonder to what extent, what inkling he had of what was going on.
He says he had no idea this was going on, that he was living separately. Remember, these are two people. If you take everything they say as true, they were part of this organization. They were part of these programs where they were made to feel that isolation was the best thing, that he had to repent for his sins, that he didn't really understand what his sins were, that Ruby was warped up in all this. And I'll give you an example. So Ruby entered a guilty plea to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. And as part of her plea deal, 2 of the 6 counts were dropped. But at her sentencing in February, Ruby seemed, or at least tried to come off as remorseful, and it seems consistent with what we heard in that phone call.
For the past 4 years, I've chosen to follow counsel and guidance that has led me into a dark delusion. My distorted version of reality went largely on evil.
Again, we know about her comments at sentencing. We're just going to jump through them
Or is she just
to get
take
Ben Chu's
accountability.
reaction because that's what we're here for.
So, Ben, what do we think? You think she's telling the truth? Did she really come around, or is she just trying to find some sort of leniency? Because, again, while the judge couldn't set the ultimate sentence, the Board of Pardons and Paroles will, and I'm sure anything that she says will be used either for or against her. But you tell me, you believe it?
Personally, I don't, but I'm not a mental health expert. It certainly was her best move to act contrite and to go along with the program and to appear to be taking responsibility. But I just think the depth and the repetition of the acts to which
He is absolutely not buying it. He doesn't buy the 180. He doesn't buy anything. He thinks she's smart. He thinks she was doing it to get leniency from the court, and he very well may be right. He very well may be right. I'm not going to disagree with him with that because either side of that is a guess. To say, yes, she did actually change or no, she didn't change is a guess. I'm hoping she did change. If she didn't, I get it. But saying that stuff on the record absolutely does have a legitimate effect on the judge, on the parole board, on the prosecutor. And she did have a positive effect based on her words, whether they were genuine or not.
she has admitted suggests something far darker.
All right. Talking about more sinister, more darker, let's move on to Jodi Hildebrand, because her co-defendant, she was a therapist offering mental health guidance, life coaching advice through her business called Connections. At some point, summer of 2023, Ruby moved into Jodi's home in Ivins, hours away from the Franke family home in Springville with her 2 youngest children, RF and EF. And based on some of Ruby's journal entries, it seemed that Jodi believed the children were possessed by demons, needed to be fixed. In fact, Kevin Franke, in his interview with police, talked about almost a supernatural element when it came to Jodi Hildebrand. Things would be moving, and shifting, and noises, and that she thought she was possessed. It was weird stuff. But going back to what we played earlier, when police showed up at her door on August 30th, she was irate that officers didn't show her a warrant. What your perspective on this?
But why are you coming into my house without a
We'll
search warrant?
explain it after this.
But that doesn't make sense. You come into my house and do what you want, and then you tell me you don't have a
No, we'll
warrant.
explain why we did.
But don't you have to have a warrant?
Not at this moment, we don't. We're here on exigent circumstances. And I'll explain it after this, after my sergeant and the.
We received his in the home, so we're ensuring.
And again, we went over all this in detail a couple videos ago. If you guys want my breakdown of exactly how the cops acted, the exigent circumstances, things like that, it's on another video on our Franke and Hildebrandt 8 Passengers playlist on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit that reminder bell so that you don't miss any of the future videos, but you can go back and watch. There's tons of videos that we have breaking down this to a detailed level. But this one is for Ben Chu.
I thought the police handled themselves extremely well. That is an exception. And
that's something we absolutely agree with. That's the entire video that I did, was basically talking about everything they did right, how they handled it so appropriately and professionally. And they did it at a time that they didn't know that this was going to be shown to everybody. And they didn't know that this was going to be a high publicity case. They probably didn't even know who these people were. I had no clue who they were prior to this case all exploding in the media. So they did all this when nobody was watching. And that's the true test of character, is what you're doing when nobody's watching. They obviously knew they had body cams, but they treated them with the utmost respect, were perfectly courteous, even as horrible as the things that they found out that these women were doing, because they saw the one child and found the other child in the house. So they knew, and nobody would have really blamed them for going off on them or being jerks, but they weren't. So I absolutely agree with Ben Chu here.
you have one child who has evidence of being tortured and indicia that there might be others in danger within the premises, it seems like they were well within their rights to proceed. In fact, I thought they gave her an extraordinary amount of due process under the circumstances. Quite remarkable that, as you said, she came out swinging. I guess the best defense is a good offense.
Now, Jodi was arrested. She was taken into custody. Investigators put her in an interview room as well. But unlike Ruby, Jodi does speak with them a bit.
We're just here to talk. I say this. Good ones. They don't do.
Often, ask you any questions that you what's going on. Do you want to double recorded?
He's an honest, good.
Yeah, worse than
Again, we also broke down these statements in another video as well, why I'm skipping them. I feel the need to explain myself whenever I skip something on a video.
I'll just
Wait for her attorney to be present before she answered any more questions. I don't know if I fault her so much, because in a way she's saying, I want to tell you.
You really faulted Ruby, but I guess saying, I want to talk to you, but I can't till my lawyer gets here is what they want them to say. I don't see a difference in just saying, I'm waiting for my lawyer. And man, I really wish I could tell you, but my lawyer tells me not to talk. But they seem to see a difference there. Let me know in the comments if you agree with them.
Side of the story. I do. My attorney's telling me to wait. I don't know if that's bad advice or a bad position to be taking there, given the circumstances.
Yeah, her affect is quite different. I mean, we saw how defiant she was when the police came to her door. To me, she looked extremely scared at this point. The reality of her predicament seems to have really hit her. She seemed almost like a different person.
So it is interesting, like the way he describes it, but he doesn't see it the same way. And I wish, again, if I could talk to Ben Chu about this, it would be an interesting conversation for me to be like, don't you think there's at least some element that Ruby Franke is still in this vortex of a world? That's why she has this flat affect, no response. Everybody's against her, so she's not even going to try. But Jodi Hildebrand kind of knew it was all a farce, because she was the one telling Ruby Franke and creating all of these visions and writing them in the pen papers. And she knew it was all fake because she was the one making it up, but Ruby actually thought it was real. And that's the reason for the difference in the two police interviews. And again, it's kind of what I talked about in the other video when we broke these down, but that's kind of how I saw it. He seems to trying to be finding a reason for why they're acting so differently as well. And he can't really figure out why, because it's very strange. You would not expect Jodi to act like this and Ruby to act like that. So there's got to be a reason for it. And we're all trying to figure out kind of what that reason is.
The way she was reaching out as far as she thought she could, and to try to engender some sympathy by the police officers. But she also said something interesting when she referred to her own powers in her professional capacity of being able to manipulate and twist the words of others, which I didn't think was the right purpose of a therapist.
I wonder if she would say.
Yeah, exactly. We had the same feeling, like she thought they were going to manipulate her words because that's what she does as a therapist.
Hey, no, I'm not saying I would do it. I'm saying I watch how people do it. Maybe that's how she would defend herself. But I wonder what she would have told them. I imagine that it could be very consistent with what we are about to hear, or maybe not, because when she was locked up, Jodi's phone calls, jailhouse phone calls, always recorded, as we were discussing earlier with Ruby, but her jailhouse phone calls were recorded. And it kind of gives you an idea of her reaction to her arrest. Not sure this is what she would have said to investigators, but let's listen to this.
It feels like I was being set up to end up here. I know that sounds bizarro.
I mean, I should be here. I haven't done anything wrong. Nobody wants the truth. Nobody wants the truth. Nobody wants the truth because these kids, I told Doug, I woke up, the spirit told me, it's all the devil. I mean, you've seen him. I mean, I've known you, for 5 years? You've watched him come at me, come at me, come at me, come at me. And you're exactly right. He uses all to make a kid sleep on the floor and raise your kids anymore. He doesn't seem, and I'm like, on him, and then he rubbed around and cut himself. Yes, but we did that to himself. Yes, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. Those pictures we did not do. He did that to himself. Yes. Did we put that on him and then he rubbed around and cut himself? Yes, but we didn't do that.
Few things there. One, it almost seems to me like a justification for their tactics, but also that the injuries are not attributable to what they did, almost blaming this 12-year-old boy.
Not almost blaming. She absolutely blamed him
for what he did to himself. What did you make of that?
That's exactly how I took it. She was angry at RF for causing his own injuries, which, in the context of what we know, that this kid was essentially waterboarded, put underwater with a hand over his mouth and his nose. I can't imagine anything more terrifying for a boy, or any behavior that a boy would do that would justify him being bound with duct tape and not fed. I mean, there's just no excuse for that. But I agree with you. Her take seems to be very angry, as if she somehow is the victim.
And I will tell you, those jailhouse phone calls were previewed by the Washington County attorney during Jodi Hildebrand's sentencing to give an idea that she's never been remorseful. So we listened to what she said on that jailhouse phone call, couple it with the fact that, yes, Jodi took a plea deal. She pled guilty to the same aggravated child abuse charges as Ruby, but at her sentencing, she didn't seem nearly as remorseful as Ruby did. And again, based on those jailhouse phone calls, it doesn't seem like she accepts any responsibility. Let's listen to this.
I sincerely love these children. I desire for them to heal physically and emotionally. One of the reasons I did not go to trial is that I did not want them to emotionally relive the experience, which would have been beautiful lives, to make
I hate to sound cynical
as an outcome.
What do we think, Ben?
I hate to sound cynical, but I don't buy it at all. I think it's completely different from that jailhouse call, which sounds uninhibited, and her true feelings, which is that these children were somehow demonic, or at least causing of their own problems, and that she was doing what was right, and that she was the one, that nobody else wants to hear the truth, and she was the one who gave them the tough love that they required.
So once again, Ruby Franke's sentencing was consistent with her later jailhouse phone calls. I don't know if Jodi's were completely inconsistent, because I don't think she was ever very nice to the kids in sentencing or in the jailhouse phone calls, but saying that she loved them, wants what's best for them. She was saying stuff like that in jailhouse phone calls too, but it's like, that's not love, and that's not what's best for them. And you don't know what's best for them clearly, and you did not show them anything anybody would define as love. So I do agree with him that, you can be as cynical as you want with Jodi Hildebrand, because she never once took responsibility for what she did or did anything to help those kids.
I don't think she was contrite.
Yeah, and both Ruby and Jodi, they were sentenced to 4 terms to run consecutively, one after the other. In Utah, it's not actually up to the judge to decide the sentence. Instead, it's up to the Board of Pardons and Paroles to decide when they're released. We're talking about a 1 to 15-year sentence for each charge, but my understanding is the law indicates they can't serve more than 30 years in total. So what we're really talking about is maybe 4 to 30 years in prison for each of them. But Ben, overall, after looking at this, do you think the videos, the photos, the audio calls, do you think this is all going to have an impact on the parole board's decision? And who do you think would end up serving more time?
Boy, that's a great question. I think, Jesse, that it will have an impact. And I think even though you could argue that Hildebrand, who didn't even feign much contrition, would get a harder sentence or longer time, I think the board may well go back to the fact that Ruby is the mother. I mean, it's Ruby's responsibility. It doesn't get Hildebrand off the hook at all. But who could possibly allow this to happen to one's own children? I mean, when you have a child, your life changes. It's not just about you anymore. It's about the child. It is her responsibility and that of her husband to make sure that no harm comes to them. So I don't think she gets a lighter sentence, no matter what contrition she may or may not have shown. I think.
So that's another part I disagree with. Again, not anything that I know or am some genius or whatever, but just basing it off what the prosecutor said. Ben Chew doesn't think Ruby Franke is going to get any lesser of a sentence. It almost sounds like Ben Chew thinks Ruby should get a harsher sentence, which I know some of you agree with, because she is the mom. But if you listen to what the prosecutor said and you look at a lot of this evidence, you can see why Jodi Hildebrand potentially deserves a harsher penalty and sentence. And maybe they're going to bring in, which they really shouldn't to this case, but all the other stuff they're hearing and finding out Jodi Hildebrand may have done to other victims that Ruby Franke didn't necessarily do. Or maybe they're taking that into account, that the safety of the community and other people, like once Ruby Franke's kids reach adulthood, which would be 8 years-ish from now, she is not as big of a danger to other kids and other people as Jodi Hildebrand might be. So Ben Chu thinks Ruby Franke, it sounds like, might get the harsher penalty. I want to back it up. It's just about a minute so we can listen to him break it down again, just so we are not putting any words in his mouth. But I certainly think Jodi Hildebrand is going to get the harsher sentence. And again, I'm basing that mostly off of what the prosecutor said, that they're not going to show up at Ruby Franke's parole board and try to push them for more time. But they are going to do that for Jodi Hildebrand.
Your life changes. It's not just about that. Ruby is the mother. I mean, it's Ruby's responsibility. It doesn't get Hildebrand off the hook at all. But who could possibly allow this to happen to one's own children? I mean, when you have a child, your life changes. It's not just about you anymore. It's about the child. It is her responsibility and that of her husband to make sure that no harm comes to them. So I don't think she gets a lighter sentence, no matter what contrition she may or may not have shown. I think she's going to do the long haul along with Hildebrand.
And again, if you haven't been through a lot of criminal sentencing, I can understand why that, does make sense. And I understand where he's coming from. And we've talked about that. It's really hard to say that she doesn't get as harsh for sentence, since they are her kids and she has that duty to protect them. But legally speaking, this stuff does matter. It does make a difference when it comes to what the sentence is going to be, what the potential sentence is going to be, what the parole board takes into account, what the prosecutor takes into account, why they made two different plea offers, even though they look the same. The prosecution's involvement in their recommendations and in the parole board is a big deal and makes a big difference, because the parole board's going to listen to the prosecutors, just like I am as we're going through this. That interview, if you haven't checked it out yet, it's the previous video right to this one, where we listened to what the prosecutors had to say about this case. And it was pretty clear to me that they all felt Jodi Hildebrand deserved a harsher sentence than Ruby Franke.
What a disturbing case, and equally disturbing materials that were released that gives us a lot more context, unfortunately, into what happened, and a lot more details about what happened. Ben Chu, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Jesse. Great to see you.
So it is always a pleasure to listen to Ben Chu and learn from him and see how he sees things, because I love the way he explains the way he feels about things and the way he sees things. So that was a really interesting interview. A couple minor points I disagree with. The main one is just that you're a professional criminal or showing consciousness of guilt by exercising your right to remain silent, or calling your lawyer or waiting for your lawyer to answer questions. I will always disagree with him on those points. It seems like that's his position when he looks at these cases, and I understand why he feels that way. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Thanks for sending me that interview. I love to see what Ben Chu's take is on these cases that we are also covering. But that's all we got for now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and make sure you subscribe to our channel as we continue to grow the community to talk about these cases, answer questions, disagree respectfully. It's really educational for me as well. So if you guys can hit that like button on your way out, that's all we've got for today. Till next time.
Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast, with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a pase you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.